Alright, I guess we're doing a review with a cat. Some of you may know me from my Instagram, others may not. I haven't made a video before. Since I'm stuck in self-quarantine like so many others of you right now, I've had a lot of time on my hands. I've had a lot of time to read. I've been reading a new book for the past week or so. I've been reading this book, How to Read a Suit by Lydia Edwards. It is the menswear equivalent of the very popular How to Read a Dress that was released a few years ago. I have not read How to Read a Dress. It is worth mentioning that I was sent this copy of the book by Bloomsbury, so I didn't purchase it myself, but any opinion I express in this video is entirely my own, and I haven't been asked to say anything or think anything or even review it. Many of you know Lydia through her Instagram account, How to Read a Dress. If you don't follow her on there, I can warmly recommend doing so. It's hard to focus with you here, Kato. Okay, so Thank you. This book is a richly illustrated guide of menswear through the 17th century and up until the 20th century. It discusses the ever-changing nature of menswear, meaning it shows what things look like and explains why they looked like that. But it also touches upon the social and political influences of some trends and fashions, meaning it discusses why certain things looked the way they did and how they came to develop throughout the centuries. The book is divided by period, and the layout has a view of a typical suit per page. This is then interspersed with pages of discussion. The suits are then broken down by their various components and styles. For some garments, there is discussion of construction details. For most, there is plenty of resource material and ample information. I particularly appreciate how the author has thrown in little examples of contemporary depictions and descriptions. This really helps with helping us place the garments in question in their contemporary context and understand a bit better how they were worn, used, and seen in their time. Now, this book can be read as a reference guide to style evolutions, either if you're a reenactor, a costume designer, costume professional, historical costumer, or... She's being so weird right now. This book can be read as reference material for most people who are involved with historical fashion. It can be used as a reference guide to style evolution, either if you're a reenactor, a costume designer, a historical costumer, regardless of whether you've spent a lot of time learning about these things or whether you're a complete novice. If you're just getting started with recreating or reconstructing historical clothing or vintage clothing for that matter, if you want to make historical costumes or if you want to get into wearing more vintage styles, I can really recommend this book. I think this book is a great resource to help train your eye, and by that I mean understanding the enormity of the source material that we have on hand that we need to take into consideration when we want to recreate a certain time period, because it's about more than just putting on a set of clothing. It's about understanding the period. It's about understanding how clothing was seen, how clothing was worn, what things you wore with what other things, who got to wear what kind of clothes, but also to help train your eye when it comes to dating images and dating objects. Being able to date paintings and garments is an extremely useful skill. It's one of my favorite things to do. It is so much fun. She's being so weird today. Oh my god. I also think that this book provides a pretty interesting take on material culture and fashion history and the creation of identity, even to people who aren't interested in fashion history, but rather have just a general history interest. Now, since I predominantly focus my work and my recreations on the early modern period, meaning 16th through 18th century history, I obviously appreciated those sections of the book the best. My favorites, of course, being the second half of the 18th century, which was covered in a few pages, but I actually wish that this book had touched a bit more on the earlier periods of fashion, maybe even covered the 16th century. The 16th century in fashion is such an interesting and dynamic time period, and while this book does have 2 examples of 16th century styles, I really wish it had touched more upon that. That's just my personal opinion, but I understand that since this is a book about suits, it doesn't really extend any earlier than 1666, which is when the 3-piece suit was introduced by Charles II. But with how well this book format works, and with how many people there are who are interested in Renaissance fashions, in 16th century fashions, in Tudor fashions, it really wouldn't surprise me if we see more books in the future that cover those earlier periods, but within this format. So Lydia, if you're watching this, please write a book about like 14th through 16th century fashions also, because please. Some of the thoughts I had while reading this book concerned some interesting questions I think it poses for our understanding of the creation of identity and fashion development. How we clothe ourselves is always and has always been loaded with commentary on social and political development. It's always been commentary on consumption, individuality, and society. And the core principle of the three-piece suit has remained largely unchanged since it was introduced in the 1660s, and especially so since the late 18th century, when men's fashion lost much of its color and splendor. The German psychologist Karl Flügel called this the Great Masculine Renunciation. He describes this as when men gave up their right to all the brighter, gayer, more elaborate and more varied forms of ornamentation. Man abandoned his claim to be beautiful. He henceforth aimed at being only useful. When compared to the artifice, extravagance and extreme femininity that women's fashion history provides us with, when you look at corsets, crinolines and tiaras, the development of male fashions can almost seem a bit dull in comparison. Because while a robe à la française worn over stays and panniers and petticoats seems very out of place in the wardrobe of the modern woman, the suit of the past does not. It doesn't immediately provide us with that sense of escapism, of luxury, of otherness, of extravagance, because we still wear suits. But that, of course, is the ultimate testament to the lasting influence of the suit. The adaptability and resilience of the suit means it has at times been a symbol of power, authority, of quality, while at other times allows you to disappear. It is just as apt to help create anonymity and to blend in as it is to help you set yourself apart from the crowd. In modern society, the trend of wearing suits and other fashions reminiscent of certain time periods in history has become increasingly popular. When you do historical reenactment, history bounding, or wear vintage clothing in your everyday life, all of which I do frequently, you use clothes that recognizably belong to the past to set yourself apart in the present. By setting ourselves apart like this, we forge subcultures and create community. We find stability and consciousness in how we clothe ourselves. And I know that some of us do that to help bring a sense of stability and belonging, and to slow down a very fast-paced and mindlessly consuming world. The author of How to Read a Suit calls vintage clothing second-hand clothing with added mystery, and I think a lot of us can agree with that. This book is a very good example of a new kind of resource that has become more readily available lately. When I started out with historical costumes, say 10 or 12 years ago, there wasn't much. There were hardly any websites, there were hardly any books. There was some material, mostly Janet Arnold books and some other old patterns, but there really wasn't anything new. In the last few years, we've seen so many incredible people publish so many new and interesting and so many hugely useful books. We've seen the creation of a community that is absolutely incredible. Suddenly there are people who can make a living doing this. So many small business owners. But a good example of the enormously valuable older resource materials would of course be the Patterns of Fashion books. I think most of you know these. Another example is the facsimile of Juan Alcega's Pattern book from 1589. You know, the kind of book that looks like this? Well, I cannot overstate the importance of these sources, how much they have taught me. The interesting trend we've seen in these last few years has been the release of books like this, like the American Duchess Guides, Tudor Tailor, which I don't have here right now, books like The Modern Maker, for example. These are all new and exciting, extremely well-researched materials for costumers, for reenactors, for anybody who's interested in fashion, history, construction of garments, or just general tailoring and sewing. But it helps provide costumers, artists, and reenactors a more hands-on source material to further deepen their understanding of the textile history that they try to recreate. It helps with accuracy, it helps with getting the right feeling to your garments, and How to Read a Suit is a perfect addition to my library. And I think that now that there are so many of us who try to come together and share in this love of historical costume, regardless of whether you do it to a great extent and wear historical costumes every single day, or whether you do more light history banding and try to incorporate historical-ish garments or styles or silhouettes or looks into your everyday fashion, I think a lot of us appreciate that we suddenly have such a vibrant and interesting community around this that actually allows for crowdfunding of publication, that actually allows for the furthering of research, and that actually allows for all of us to come together and share in this incredible hobby we have, which throughout history really has been neglected and overlooked. And that's why I think it's so important that we see all these initiatives right now. That's also why it makes me so incredibly happy when I receive books like this, because that only goes to prove that this is such an incredible, new and vibrant community built on so many fantastic people and so much passion and interest. It's also really rooted in something physical. It's not built upon ideas as much as it is built upon actual objects and something that we can all relate to, being clothing, being fashion, being identity, being self-expression. And I think that just really suits itself well to our time. To summarize, this book is a highly enjoyable read. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I recommend it as sort of reference material. I recommend it for furthering your understanding of different time periods of fashion developments, for any historical costume purpose, really. I'm going to see if I can get my hands on the women's wear version. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the women's wear equivalent is. I also want to say thank you for watching this video. I think Kato probably wants to say thank you also. She's not happy right now. Well, these people were very patient with how you disturbed me when I tried to talk about the book. Okay, I'll let you know. I was more than a little nervous when filming this, simply because I know that many of you already follow me on Instagram or have perhaps seen me on Facebook and any of the historical costuming groups, but it's always a daunting thing to create a video with face and voice and a bit more of a personal take on your own thoughts. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on this book, and if you do end up purchasing it and enjoying it, or purchasing it and not enjoying it, do let me know either on my Instagram page or in the comment section here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Facebook. If you enjoyed this book, please let Lydia know that you did over at How to Read a Dress. Thank you. Bye.